Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Welcome, everybody, to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited today to have my friend Drew Boa. Drew's the founder and head coach of Husband Material. For the past 10 years, he's helped hundreds of Christian men achieve freedom from porn and heal of all kinds of sexual brokenness. He has a master's in Christian formation from Wheaton College. He is a pastoral sex addiction professional from the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. He's also the author of Redeemed Sexuality. Drew, it is so awesome to have you on the Red Ink Revival Podcast.
It's good to be here, Patrick. Let's do this thing.
Let's get her done, man. Well, to begin rolling, I do want to tell our audience that today's going to be real and raw. We'll be talking about sex and sexuality, so be mindful of any of the children's ears that are in the background. And here we go. I love to start, Drew, with hearing people's faith story. What is your faith story? And then think through how that overlaps and share with us how you became a recovery coach.
Yeah. Actually, no one in my family was a believer in Christ when I was born. So I came from a family where my mom became a Christian when I was 3 years old. And then she prayed for my sister and for me and for my dad for many years. And eventually, we all did the exact same thing. And we became Christians, we became baptized. And I fell in love with Jesus when I was 13, 14, partly because I had gone through some very traumatic experiences and felt like I didn't really have anything left in life. And so I turned to Christ at that time. And I loved Jesus. And also, growing up in this family which was very religious, even though they weren't really Christians, I thought sex was nasty and gross and evil. And so in the middle of all of that, as my sexuality developed, I eventually ended up with a sexual fetish, being attracted to something weird, something different, something interesting and not so typical. And so that's really how my sexual formation and deformation ended into pornography. I mean, it led me into pornography, and it wasn't even traditional porn, but it was the kind which was satisfying my specific attractions and urges. And so I had this duality of loving Jesus and hating what I was sexually attracted to and not being able to get away from it or understand why it was there.
Wow. That's amazing. And so you're at Wheaton College, and if I understand your story, you end up engaging some of the professors to kind of help you make sense of it. Is that correct?
That was a part of it. There were some great professors like Dr. William Struthers, who wrote Wired for Intimacy, and I see that you've had him on the show, which is awesome.
He's a boss, yeah.
Yeah, so at Wheaton, I got into a group of students, and it was called Lust-Free Living. It wasn't very deep. It wasn't very clinical, or even really very Christ-centered, but it was something. And at least we started these conversations, and we had some professors who knew what they were talking about. But when it came to our small groups, we didn't really know what we were doing. At the same time, when I was able to open up about things, that brought me tremendous relief, and it was terrifying and liberating. So I really began healing at that time.
Wow.
Partially, and was still immersed in this purity culture approach. For example, in Lust-Free Living, they had this exercise called your lustimony. So when you share your story, it's your lustimony.
Only Christians can come up with such things. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so I got frustrated. I thought we need something better. This cannot be the best that was out there. And since then, that was back in 2011. Since then, amazing resources have come out, and so many great books, and professionals have brought a lot of expertise and understanding to the field. Well, back then, the best we had was lust-free living. I didn't know about the people who were out there. Well, that's what led me to write Redeemed Sexuality. It's the book that I wish I had in college.
Wow, that's incredible. So in your journey, you end up becoming a pastoral sexual addiction professional with the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. So how did you get there? How did that space come available, and what interested you to say, I got to go to the deep end on this?
A big part of it was my own story and needing to work through my healing at a deeper level, because I had achieved over a year of freedom from porn and masturbation. And at Wheaton College, I was that guy who people could point to and say, look at Drew. Victory is possible. Freedom is real. Healing is available. And he's proof. And I was leading all of those small groups at Wheaton. And when I graduated college, that post-college transition hit me really hard. I lost all my support system. And I felt like I went back to the beginning, that I was struggling more than ever sexually. And the reason why is because those attractions and fantasies were still lurking in the shadows. And even though I had so much healing and freedom, there was a part of my heart which the love of God still had not touched yet. And there was all this arousal that I didn't understand. So around that time, I was getting engaged to be married, and I wanted to be husband material. I wanted to be able to take those wedding vows and know that porn was in the past, that it was not coming back, that the healing had gone to the very bottom. And that's when I started researching addiction and taking classes with sex addiction therapists and sex therapists. And so I went a lot deeper. And eventually, that led me to get more training. And so I could help other people on this journey. I mean, I was already helping people from a spiritual formation perspective, and now it was bringing in a lot more of the clinical, psychological side, which I needed in order to have a complete understanding of how this stuff works.
Hey everybody, I want to slide right in here and thank you for joining us for today's episode. Let me ask you for a huge favor. If this podcast is providing value to you, would you consider subscribing to it wherever you get your podcasts? Also, if you feel that it would be valuable to somebody else, please like it, comment on it, and share it on your social media feeds like YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you populate networking. And one more big favor. If you like the show, please go review it. And if it's true for you, give us 5 stars. And when you review it and rate it, it gives our efforts greater opportunity to grow, and that would mean the world to us. Now let's go back to this week's episode. Well, I'm also, as you know, a PSAP supervisor, and I went through this, wave the flag, I went through the CSAT side, and that made me a supervisor at the end. And I know for me, so much healing happened in the journey. Just getting through the different modules, the information, and then the exercises, the requirement to look at stuff. And of course, the Bible for me just came alive. I'm sure it did you too, where you're just like, wow. I remember when I first began to think about Romans 6, 7, and 8 in a totally different way, and realizing that the sin that reigns in the mortal body is actually sin that reigns in the mortal body. That it's actually the impact of trauma upon our brain and nervous system. And just beginning to see how Hebrews chapter 12 says the root of bitterness springs up. So it's unwarranted. You don't prep for it. It's just bam, there it is. And you're like, I have life under control. This is all managed, and then it's not. And it says that it troubles, it annoys, it incites, excites, and then finally it defiles, it inks, it causes an identity marker. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I think about the whole armor of God, and the fiery darts are, fire is always a reference metaphorically to intensified emotion, and that the enemy would shoot an arrow that in the Roman arsenal would explode on impact. And it's as though this metaphor of the enemy is simply leveraging opportunity against our emotions, which are tied back to our stories and the impacts in our life. So you are you did formation work in your studies at Wheaton. What were some of the spiritual, biblical kind of takeaways that you began to see, not just about sex, though sex is such a purified, it's such a concentrated dose of what's happening in the heart. It's kind of like where Jesus says, where your money is, there's your treasure also. You could say where your sex is, you can actually identify what's going on in the heart. And so for you, what were some of the things that were coming alive scripturally for you in your process?
Yeah. For me, one of the verses which described my early healing journey was James 5:16. Confess your sins to one another and pray for each other so that you may be healed.
Yeah.
Love that one. And that's the kind of verse where we don't need to do a big Bible study or commentary on it. We just need to do it. We need to actually get in the arena.
Exactly, right.
And
why is that
it.
important? Because what does that do? Why did that particular verse and idea of confessing your faults one to another, why did that become so alive in you?
Mm-hmm. Again, purity culture, which is the predominant evangelical approach to sexuality, is all about silence and shame. We don't talk about sex.
Yeah.
It's dirty, it's gross.
Yeah.
Unless you're married. And then somehow everything's okay. It's like, I don't know how we got this idea that if you're in bed with someone you're married to, whatever you do is now not objectifying or lustful. But the point is, if you're married, it's okay. If you're single, then don't even go anywhere near anything sexual. Never talk about it. Never open up about it. It wasn't safe. The original sex addiction researcher, Patrick Carnes, found some patterns that describe almost all of the patients who were coming in to see him, who he described as sexually addicted. They came from a home that was rigid. In other words, there are strict rules and inflexible beliefs, and it was disengaged. It was disconnected from their hearts. And so it was not safe and it was not connected. And that's basically a deficit of attachment. There's a lack of secure attachment. And he said that the families which are most likely to have that unique mixture are evangelical Christian homes. Strict rules, inflexible beliefs, lack of emotional connection. That's the setup. That's the water. Now you mix that in with early exposure to porn, because exposure is happening earlier and earlier for my generation and those that are coming after me. Absolutely. And it's no wonder that most of us are dealing with this. It's no longer the exception. Sexual brokenness is the norm for my generation and afterwards. And so when we confess our sins to one another, we break the silence. And we dismantle the power of shame. And it also, I think, is magnified by the particularity of what we confess. It's one thing to say, I fell, or I messed up, or I'm struggling with masturbation even.
Right.
To tell somebody, hey,
man.
I have a sexual fetish for something weird. And let me tell you what that is. Now we're getting into the specificity and the particularity, and then we can have specific particular healing. And also, I think it's important to not only confess the sins that we have committed, and also the sins that have been committed against us. Because we really need to heal from both.
Yeah. That's so good. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah. I was going to say that the usual approach to recovery from porn is actually a reenactment of the rigid, disengaged system. In our accountability, purity groups that I was a part of in my early days,
Right.
it's built on strict rules, inflexible beliefs, and a lack of emotional connection. Right? Just checking in.
That's
Hey, man,
wild,
how are you
isn't it?
doing? How'd you do this week? Oh, I masturbated. Oh, that really sucks. Well, at least God loves us. Or all right, well then we gotta tighten up the restrictions and maybe start slapping ourselves with a rubber band every time we mess up. I mean, all of that is just making things worse. And only when we can really become vulnerable can we open ourselves up to the possibility of healing. And it doesn't come through that. It comes through curiosity and kindness and compassion.
Yeah, that's so good.
And I love what you said about our bodies too, because we have to experience it in our bodies. It's one thing to know that intellectually, but to undergo the healing touch of a brother or sister in Christ is amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I think of the word pure and purity culture, I think I'm one of those that's averse to those terms simply because I don't think anybody is technically pure without the simple work of Christ.
Amen.
I like the word sexual health. I always prefer talking about health because health describes growth. Purity describes an ending point. Yeah. And so I love how you're describing that yourself. Well, you have coached for the past 10 years, just hundreds of guys. And some it's around porn, some it's around acting outside their marriage. And so I'm curious, what are some of the struggles that you're witnessing today, and how does it compare against some of the struggles men had 10 years ago when you started?
I'd like to wind the clock back even further, if I may.
Yeah, do.
Back before internet porn became anonymous, available, free, so widely ubiquitous in our culture. Before it hit the scene, if you wanted to go into some kind of unwanted sexual behavior, there was a lot more risk that you had to take. Maybe you had to go to an adult store or something. Maybe you had to buy sex from a person. These days, it's all online. Any fantasy, any variety of arousal or attraction, it's all at our fingertips. And especially for kids growing up now, it's like we have that from a very young age. So it used to be that addiction experts would say the first thing you need to do is stop the behavior. The first thing you need to do is stop going to the adult store and implement some restrictions and boundaries in place. These days, whatever boundaries or restrictions you put up is something that you can get around. And young people know how to do it. It just becomes a game for us of like, oh, I wonder how I can beat the system this time. So, they used to say that.
In fact, there's a real dopamine hit from that, right?
Exactly.
There is. And so you go through, I know young guys who will go through Instagram and they can go through the back door of Instagram, get on the internet and go anywhere they want to go. And it's like they got such a bigger hit in some ways to break the code to get out to the internet than they actually did from the porn once they got there.
That's so true. That is so true. So we can no longer take the approach of restrictions first, stop the bleeding first, just try to manage your behavior first, and then do the deeper healing, and then go into your fantasy and your family and all the heart stuff. I think we need to start with that now. We need to start with the arousal now, because the arousal's everywhere and it's whatever you want it to be. It's so accelerated, it's so intense that that I believe starting with the deeper healing work is what the future needs to be.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry that will increase your leadership, and they're both free. I'm talking about monthly Zooms and also weekly process groups. First, we hold a monthly Zoom event that is 1+ hours with Dr. Todd Bowman, a psychologist and human behavior expert, and me. We usually have around 15 to 30 other participating pastors, spouses, and leaders. The monthlies have been amazing to help pastors collaborate around tactics, personnel challenges, and even how to navigate our own inner world. The skills you'll learn and a newfound pastoral community will expand your leadership mapping with everybody you lead. These monthly Zooms happen every month on the second Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time. And then the second opportunity for pastors and spouses is our weekly process group that spans for 6 weeks. In our weekly process group, we provide tools that guide you into your story and help you rediscover you, redefine leadership, redeem life, and redream ministry. Weekly process groups give time to open your stories as you collect the dots, connect the dots, and correct the dots. Attunement begins with you making sense of your story. When you live with mindful attunement to your story, you'll find that the people you lead will begin to also make leadership sense to you in profound new ways. Our alumni tell us that this is one of the most impactful experiences they have ever had. We place ladies in groups of 6 to 10, and also we put men in groups of 6 to 10. The value of the weekly experience is $900+ per person. However, in this season, we're offering it to you for free. You can see some of our alumni sharing stories on our events web pages. You can find out everything you need to know to get involved in either the monthlies or the weekly process groups by going to redinkrevival.com. I hope to see you there soon.
Well, I think about a lot of the work you do, which incidentally for our audience, a lot of men who have struggled with porn and or acting out sexually, I send to Drew. Drew is somebody that I trust. I believe in what he's doing. I love the resources. I love his groups that he has, and so many amazing testimonies. And probably the biggest thing that I love about you, Drew, is the way you model it. Model it as in the system of your healing and health that you bring men through. And from a Christian faith perspective, but without the rigidity, with a lot of intimacy, with a lot of vulnerability and trust. And so I do, man, I love what you do. And so one of the things you talk a lot about, which I love, is the distinction between behavior compliance, behavior management, and then actual healing. Talk more about that and what that is to be differentiated about.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for your trust. And yeah, it's great to be able to do this work. Isn't it such a gift and a privilege that we get to do this?
Come on.
When it comes to deeper healing, I believe it comes down to going below the surface of our behaviors and our urges and our attractions and our fantasies, going below the surface to the aches, to the longings, and the desires of our heart, which are born out of stories of suffering. Yeah. So I'll get real specific. Good. There's power in particularity. So the sexual fetish I told you all about was for braces and orthodontics. Okay?
Yep. So just say that again, because I think people might have missed what you just said. That your particular fetish that you started out with, that everybody's been wondering, I wonder what it is. You just said it. Could you tell them again?
Yes. It is for braces and orthodontics, specifically with middle school girls. So if I had been using hardcore or even any kind of traditional pornography back then, it would have been child pornography. Now, the reality is I could find everything I needed on social media. Back in the day, it was MySpace,
Oh, wow.
It was Facebook. These days, it's Instagram. I could find all the pictures and all the videos that I want just on social media because of that specific fetish. So you can see why none of the accountability software or filters or blockers would work for me, right?
So amazing.
Yeah. So that was my situation that I was dealing with. These urges, these attractions, I don't understand them. I don't even like them. I don't even know where they come from. Okay? It's like, why?
Yeah.
Why do I like this stuff? And a lot of the guys that I work with,
Yeah.
it's same-sex attraction. Why am I drawn more towards men than towards women? Why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, each of us has an arousal template, a mixture of what arouses us, and that's what it was for me.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, underneath that, when I get into, okay, where is this coming from in my life? I can get curious about that. What are the deeper desires and longings of my heart? It takes me back to middle school. It takes me back to when I was 13, 14 years old. Remember when I said my life was falling apart and there was all this trauma at that age for me? Well, that's the age when all the girls have braces.
Yeah.
And it goes back.
Wow.
It goes back there. And of course it has roots earlier than that. Sexual abuse covertly by both parents, all of that set me up. But when all my hormones were bursting forth in puberty, going through the most traumatic experiences of my childhood and feeling completely disconnected and alone at school and middle school,
Yeah.
what I wanted was access to the mouth of a girl. I wanted my first kiss.
Wow.
And that also ties into having my own face invaded by the mouths of women in my family. My grandmother, my aunt, even my own mother. And that's the place where I was harmed. And some of my fantasies had to do with power and domination. And taking control of another person. And I was like, okay, that's really evil, but that's really arousing to me. And it all goes back to this little boy who was wounded and who had a good and holy longing to be connected.
Yes.
And to be accepted and to be powerful where I felt powerless. And when I learned how to love that little boy, oh man, it no longer is a frustrating, exhausting battle against my urges. I'm going deeper than the urges into the desires and then pursuing those in a healthy way. Man, what a better life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that goes back to your confessing your faults, your sins one to another, right? It's the invitation to true heart connection with another human being that satisfies the anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, so it satisfies the deeper desire and also it's absolutely terrifying because in order for me to receive what I really wanted, which was acceptance in this part of my life, I have to risk rejection.
Yeah.
I have to take a risk that, you know what? I know I never want to feel that way again, how rejected and powerless I felt, but I have to be willing to feel that again in order for me to get the opposite.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Well, what's that look like? Yeah, well, tell us what that looks like.
Let's say you're in a recovery group and you guys are telling your stories and it's your turn. And there's something you want to share. Maybe you've never shared it before with anyone else. And maybe you have good reason that you haven't shared it. Because in your family it was not okay to talk about sex and there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of contempt. And if you share this, you are opening yourself up to the possibility of being wounded again.
Yeah.
And you're opening up yourself to the possibility of being healed.
Oh, come on.
And you can't have one without the other. You can't have the healing without the risk, without the redemptive risk. And of course, you need to take that risk in a wise way. You want to do it with a safe group of people. But if
Right.
if I am trying to get that acceptance and feeling of power through pornography, it's just reinforcing the story of suffering. It's not actually meeting my desire. Yeah, it's taking care of the urge for a while, but it is dampening my desire because it's taking me further from getting it fulfilled in real life.
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
Yes, so amazing. And I so champion you and just inspired by your vulnerability because your fetish was a very unique fetish. And I've heard you talk about it before, so this is something that doesn't have shock effect for me. But it's like Brene Brown says, when you share your story, it feels weak and vulnerable, but other people see it as courage and strength.
Yes.
And that's what I see. And I love because everybody can identify. We all have. If we are human and have had any impact, any damage, any setbacks, there's something in us that wants certain things in our arousal template sexually, and it shows up in our money, it shows up in our ministry vision. So some of our biggest ambitions in ministry are nothing more than a parallel model of what's happening in us sexually. And so I love that you're going there with us and helping us make sense of it. I would love to dig a little more into the teenage side of things. Yeah. When I help parents and talk through the sexual porn exposure to now addiction, and especially when you have a middle schooler who just can't stop. One of my pastor friends' adult daughters just posted yesterday how she had been exposed by a friend at age 9, and at age 9 was when a porn addiction began for her. And so for teenagers, what are some commonalities? What are some things that you see happening in considerations we need to have about teenagers? And then if you jump into the parenting side of that, gosh, if we could just help some parents know how to manage. Because sometimes parents feel like, why can't you just stop? Why can't you just say no? And why do you keep doing it? And the teenage boy or girl's like, well, I'm trying to not. I don't want to. I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. So take us into that world. And do you work with teenagers at all in your husband material?
Yeah, I do. Not many. Just a few.
Yeah.
I only have space for a couple. But I love it. I love working with those guys. Men only. I don't work with girls.
What if we had a mentor like that,
Yeah.
right? As young men. Come on.
Exactly. And in my approach to healing trauma, I developed something called older brother coaching, where you become the older sibling that you never had. And give your inner child what he or she needed.
Yeah.
And that's what we really want to find out. Is, okay, who is this person, this middle schooler? Who is he or she? What is their beauty? What is their strength? What lights them up? Where do they come alive? I want to see their heart, because pornography has exploited them.
Yeah.
A lot of them, because of the silence and shame of purity culture, they believe it's all their fault. When in fact, porn is a $100 billion industry which is taking advantage of them from a young age, just like it takes advantage of its performers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is profound injustice here. And so just kind of normalizing that, validating that, and finding out, okay, what is the beauty of your heart which porn is seeking to exploit, right? For me, it was that desire to be accepted. And part of that's my superpower of being able to accept others, of being able to give others a kind of welcoming place, an environment where they can be themselves, because that's what I didn't have. And so there's a beauty and a strength within each boy or girl, and it needs to be discovered, and you just can't do that with all the behavior management techniques.
That's so good. So you're saying that as a parent, the best approach is to, first of all, be emotionally present and tuning in, be attuned to your child. So you're not looking at behavior, you're looking at the emotional processes that are going on below the surface. I mean, when a child comes home from school, you're meeting them to identify their emotional state, and you don't have to bring up the verbiage, but the fact that you are there, you see them, and you're feeling with them. They are being felt themselves, as Dr. Dan Siegel would call it. And so
Feeling
that's
felt.
where it all begins. And then when they are struggling with porn, which the fact that a teenager would even let mom and dad know about it is one of the greatest gifts, right?
That's
That
their
is a
beauty and
gift.
strength. That's it.
It is. And so once they do that, you're saying that as a parent, the real glory of that moment is sharing in the experience of what is going on in them without shame, without guilt, but exploring what is it that you're searching, and helping, guiding them to see what's happening in their inner world. Is that what you're saying?
More or less. I mean, as a boy, as a teenager especially, experiencing all these emotions, I was undiscovered. Except in porn.
That's a powerful statement.
So can I be lovingly discovered by my mother or father in my grief, in my sorrow, and in the glimmers and glimpses of joy every once in a while? I played a lot of video games. My parents never had any interest in engaging me in that. Played hours and hours and hours. And you know what the video games were about? They were role-playing games where I got to be a hero.
Yeah.
I was saving the world. There is a beauty and a strength within that boy who is a knight in shining armor, who wants to take on dragons in this world. Right. But that's the only place where he can do it, is in the video games or in porn, when I can have a kind of a conquest, a sexual conquest of these girls who I felt like I could never even come close to. So if you were to really discover my heart, you would see a kid who is so noble, even while he's just sitting on the couch for hours and hours. There was a nobility within me, and that's what I'm now stepping into. I'm going out there taking on the dragons of trauma and the porn industry. I'm coming alive. This is who I am. This is my heart. Yeah. And I can embrace that with knowing this is who I am in Christ, Yeah. And that's the image of God within me, and it was undiscovered. We need to discover one another, and we need to discover our children to see, what is the life that you have within you, and porn is dampening it. It's just kind of outsourcing it.
Hey, I want to invite you, if you are listening and thinking, I have so many questions I would like to ask. We would love to address your questions on an upcoming episode. In fact, we may do an entire episode on the one question that you have. If you will simply email us at redincrevival@gmail.com. We will catalog all of these questions, and we would love to be able to address the things on your heart and on your mind. So be sure to get in touch with us, and we'll take the journey together.
So I guess the biggest question is why? For little Drew, it's why are you playing so many video games? Why are you spending so much time in your room with the door locked and you're on the computer screen? And if we discover with curiosity and compassion, then we have a restored relationship, a secure attachment, and that's what we really need, right?
And the why can't be accusatory.
Yeah.
The why has to be a point of emotional interest and investment and no judgment, a judgment-free zone. It's just, what do I see and what do I feel and how do I celebrate you? How do I meet you with empathy? And on a neuroscience level, I just find it fascinating that so many of the emotional desires, which desire is an emotional expression, happens beginning in the amygdala. And the cortisol releases has a big part of it, but the anterior cingulate gyrus with its oxytocin release, which only releases with empathy, compassion, and trust. So if we can meet our children with empathy, compassion, and trust, we, with mirror neurons, will even trigger the oxytocin that uniquely calms the cortisol. Yeah. And so we're able to bring wholeness and healing just by being present with no judgment, but exploring with interest and value and looking for the glory, on a treasure hunt for the glory that's in that child.
Amen.
And so that's, again, the work that I hear you do. You're really, and your organization is just really good at that. Is there anything else that maybe you would want to add to parents to kind of help them make sense of what do I do? Because there's panic in parents because, you know, we catastrophize. We end up going into the future and seeing them as pimps and hookers and, gigolos or whatever. Yeah. So what would you, any other thoughts on parenting?
Yes. You talked about the amygdala. When a parent discovers a child using pornography or having this struggle, that amygdala will be activated. There will be some kind of fear. It's going to be there. And there are at least three different fear responses. Some say there are up to 5. Let's just keep it to fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah. You can either attack the child with preaching at them, lecturing them, or punishing them. you can go into flight, avoiding, of we're going to sweep it under the rug, never going to talk about it. I'll hide.
Yeah.
Or freeze.
Yeah.
Just immobilized, not knowing what to do and not saying anything, and completely shutting down. Fear intensifies arousal. You talked about kind of like the quest on Instagram to get around the filter, right? There's a tension, there's a fear that actually increases arousal. So a fear-based response is going to increase the arousal of a child. Only that empathy, kindness, and love can de-escalate the situation and bring soothing.
Yeah.
And that's what
biblically, perfect love casts out fear.
Amen.
And so, in our training, what's so wild, and I remember sitting there hearing Dr. Carnes talk about that all addiction is based in an anxiety disorder, or he would call it an intimacy disorder.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh my gosh. And to know that this has been in the Bible all along is just fascinating for me.
That's
I
good,
think it's wild.
Perfect love casts out fear. And
that's not the concept, right? That's not the concept of love. It's the experience of love that casts out fear. In other words, it's not just doctrinizing it, if that's a word.
And it's not just saying, I love you.
Yes. That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Being able to give and receive love fills us up to the point that there's just no space for porn. One of the things I like to say is that porn is a pacifier.
Oh, there you go.
And that goes back to some of the childhood roots that we've been talking about. It was my way of getting through life, of numbing the pain, or of trying to seek some kind of connection. But when I'm able to experience that emotional intimacy, attachment, real connection with a real person, then I don't need the pacifier.
Yeah. That's so good. So you're getting it at the root. You're actually addressing the energy pocket that drives.
Yeah.
And so a person now freely can manage the temptation. Still temptation, but you can manage it. Whereas before, it was unmanageable energy.
And here's another way to say it. Lately, I've been really fascinated by the concept of sexual development and stages of sexual development.
Interesting.
So just like child development theory talks about different stages that we go through, the same is true sexually. And the final stage of adult sexuality is mature management. We can't start there.
Interesting.
There are all these prerequisite stages from when we're infants, and the first stage is attachment. It's just bonding and experiencing that eye-to-eye, soul-to-soul connection, safe touch, and then getting into curiosity of like, what is my body? What is sexuality? Blessing it. Also having boundaries, like with other children, personal space, and then being able to talk about it, being able to accept our emotions and experiment. And then finally you get to mature management. And the purity culture approach, the surface level behavior approach starts with, okay, let's try to manage it. But it needs to be grounded in all of these other things where we are able to embrace all that is within us first.
Love it.
That's
so good, man. So good. Let's pivot because I want to be sensitive to your time. There is something that you have talked about in one of your latest podcasts with a guest around what's called spiritual bypass. Help us understand spiritual bypass and how we tend to do that thinking that we're being spiritual when in effect it's creating some problems.
Yeah, I learned it from Pastoral Sex Addiction Professional professor, Dr. Craig Cashwell. And the idea of a bypass is basically a shortcut. So using spirituality to shortcut or short circuit what's happening in our bodies and our emotions. For example, if you are going through loss, let's say you just lost your job, or you lost a family member, or you just had a big breakup, and somebody comes in and says, you shouldn't feel sad, you shouldn't feel angry, maybe you shouldn't feel sad because God uses all things for his glory, or you shouldn't feel angry because the Bible calls us to forgive, or you shouldn't feel depressed because the joy of the Lord is your strength. Shoulding all over each other. Slapping a spiritual solution on emotional pain.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when people do that, and when we do that, because I do it too,
Yeah.
we are using those Bible verses as a kind of crutch, as a kind of way to avoid, to bypass the important emotional processing that needs to take place. It's kind of like using it like a pacifier. It's like using my faith as a pacifier instead of porn. But we're using it for the same purpose, to try to somehow deal with the suffering in my life. Because it feels intolerable. Rather than inviting Jesus into the suffering, the pain, the loss, experiencing his heart for me, the tenderness of God, rather than the toughness of who we think God is, you know?
Yeah.
That's spiritual bypass.
I love that. Yeah. I love the language. I love the vantage point to even search that out, because I do find that there are things that we tend in Christianity to do that inadvertently causes us to escape the reality of our moment. And you can't escape reality without avoiding truth, and only truth can make you free. So it's important to be able to see the reality of our story, the reality of our moment, to feel what we feel when we are having an emotional distress or disruption, to be able to ask it questions. I wonder why, where that's coming from. I wonder what it's trying to tell me. Where I grew up spiritually thinking that the way you handle it is your emotions somewhat are the voice of the enemy, so you make it the enemy and you fight it. And you do not let emotions tell you anything. It's like, no, you let emotions, not just you invite them, you explore them to tell you what's going on below the surface. You just don't let the emotions be the governing factor. Right. But you allow them to be the gauge to tell you there's something going on down there. And you need to find out what it is. Because here's the thing about emotions, which you know, but I find it so fascinating, is emotions are not just something I'm experiencing in the moment and that's it. That is kind of the surface side of it. What's happening is something's happened in our nervous system, in our bodies. Something has happened in our brains. And until we go back to find out how it got coded, what was the programming that went into it, you're never going to be able to reprocess. It's like Dan Siegel, the neuroscientist at UCLA, says, you got to name it to tame it. Yes. Your brain needs to have the acknowledgement of reality to be able to begin for the brain to reprocess.
Yeah, while you were talking just now, I just got an image of the nervous system giving us some kind of message, and the emotion is like a messenger.
Come on.
We get mad at the messenger.
That's we shoot him.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, wait. He has something important to say.
Oh my gosh. That's so good. So good. Well,
we got to welcome the messenger.
Yes.
Listen to the messenger.
Yeah.
And then bring that messenger in touch with the presence of God, right?
Oh, come on. The intimacy of his presence. Come on.
Yes.
So true. So true. That's so good. Well, let's pivot one more time, and because again, you have another podcast you did on measuring freedom, and the whole concept that you deal with there, I'm interested in. So when you talk about measuring freedom from pornography, what are some key ways we should actually even be thinking about that?
The usual way people measure freedom from porn is just in behavior. How long has it been since you last acted out? Which is such a surface level indicator. You could be frequently acting out, and yet you really are healing and gaining momentum, and God is doing something wonderful. Or you could have a long period of sobriety, but it does not mean very much. So how do we really measure the heart transformation? And I've come up with 4 categories. Number 1, first level of freedom is misery. It's just being able to experience the misery of how pornography is devastating me. It's like being honest about that. There's misery. Stage 2, motivation. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to join a program. I'm going to take a redemptive risk. Actually going to maybe join one of your intensives or something like that. Stage 3 is maturity. And maturity involves that process of growing up through the stages of development, outgrowing my pacifier one day at a time, becoming a healthy sexual adult, and then finally mastery, where it's no longer a frustrating, exhausting battle. My sexuality is my friend now, and I'm able to manage it in a healthy way.
Let me break in one more time and tell you about RedinkRevival.com, REDINK Revival.com. I want to encourage you to sign up for our blog e-newsletter there, as every month it will hit your inbox with a provocative blog post with topics about theology, biblical architecture for emotions, and how understanding the human brain is so helpful in giving more insights to various biblical texts. We also will feature updates on our monthly events to help you keep up on the ready for everything that is available to you. Also, I'd like to remind you, if this podcast is serving you with valuable insights, to subscribe to the podcast. If you think someone else would benefit from it, please review it, comment, and share it on your social media platforms. If your friends are privileged to know what's helping you, who knows what God might do in their life with the same resources. That would be a gift to us, and it would be a gift to all your friends. We're holding you in our hearts and believing God with you for a year of supernatural increase.
That's so good, man. I love how you made that an organized system of thought. That's awesome. I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's
what
not
do you
just
like about
managing the behavior. What I love is that it again goes back to looking at freedom not from the behavioral perspective, but the biblical model of growth. It is that I'm progressing from the heart out of the heart proceed all the issues of life. So why is it that we judge the issues of life or make it the metric when the heart is where it's coming from? And so being able to go all the way back to the beginning, but your words, the key categoric words that you use there, you just make it simple. That's one of the things I always love about you is you make things so accessible. When we talk about these things, you know, I love in our podcast, we talk about everything from vision to the grandiosity that some of us in ministry are driven by. We look at so many different aspects, but I love talking about sex. I love talking about sex because it is one of the most concentrated, purest forms that allows us to see into the heart and soul of a human, what's going on the inside. And so when we take that model and put it over any area of our lives, we find out why we lead the way we lead, why we are married and husband the way we husband, or for wives the way they wife, you know, the way they do, or parent the way we parent. What gets triggered? The reason my kids push buttons. What is the button that they're pushing? It's all in the same model. It helps us understand our attachment wounds, which you so eloquently and accessibly talk about. So what would you kind of offer pastors and leaders, church staff, as we begin to wind this up, everything we've talked about, how would you help pastors and leaders as they lead?
Go first.
Come on.
Probably the greatest gift you could give to your congregation, to your family, to your spouse, is to go first.
Yeah.
To be the first one to share your story, to be vulnerable in an appropriate way, to create that space, and then you give everybody else the gift of going second or third or fourth.
So good. It's so good. And truly, you can't lead your staff or your family or anybody else's story if you don't know your story. If you're not working on your story of attachment all the way to vulnerability and group, you can't lead anybody else.
And that is one of my favorite quotes from Dan Allender. We can only take others as far as we have gone ourselves.
There you go.
So
That's
go first, go far, go deep into your own healing, and you'll create space for others to do the same.
Yeah.
What an incredible adventure.
It really is. You know, our pastors that come to our retreats, you know, we'll have process groups of 6 to 10, and then we have lecture environments that we share with them a lot of the tools that you're talking about here. And at the end of the week, they'll say, you know, our brand is Red Ink Revival. They'll say, Patrick, do you have any idea? This is the greatest revival experience I've ever had. Do you know that the word revival is so true here? And they get just, overwhelmed excited, which is so validating for what you were talking about earlier, just being able to partner with people and watch God do this stuff. But one of the things weeks and months later that they come back to me with is probably the biggest takeaway is that they no longer lead their staff, their family, they no longer lead their church in the same way. When somebody comes at them attacking, they're able now to zoom out to Google Earth and notice there's distress going on in that person. Their attack is only the front. It's only the mask. It is the alter ego. Something else is going on the inside. And what if we explored it? And they really report that their entire ministries change. And it's the same stuff that, you know, you're helping everybody with every week in the area of recovery from porn, in moving towards sexual health. Well, tell us how to get a hold of you. I do want everybody in the audience to be aware I have complete trust and celebration. I always send people to Drew and Husband Material. I think it's one of the great ministries, particularly for Christian men, but even it's on the very top shelf of all sexual recovery stuff that I'm aware of. And you have groups, you have a lot of different environments for people to connect in, and even different pay scales to be able to get in if you don't hardly have any resources, which a lot of men tend to say they don't. And if you don't, Drew wants to help you. So Drew, tell them some of the things you got going on and how they can engage you.
Yeah, come to husbandmaterial.com. And step one is listening to the podcast. Just like this one, we have podcasts coming out every week on all kinds of topics, and they're the topics that you guys come up with. They're the topics that I don't create. I just take what you guys are struggling with, and then we do episodes about it. Step two
one
is
of your recent ones. Well, one of your recent topics was something like God and the penis. What was that title?
Theology of the penis.
That is awesome.
Isn't that
Go
great?
ahead.
And the point of that episode is to bring a blessing to a part of us which has been cursed.
That's good, man.
Our penises are so vulnerable.
I know you're so serious, but that is an interesting way to say that.
Yeah.
But that's real. That's real.
Yeah, the enemy attacks this part of us, and we have used it in alignment with darkness rather than with God's great, amazing design. So theology of the penis is kind of reclaiming that territory.
Wow. Wow.
So you can listen to the podcast. Step 2 is to join our free private community for Christian men. And then step 3 would be to get into Husband Material Academy, which is our video course. And we do coaching calls on Zoom where it gets real very quickly. We talk about arousal and childhood wounds and trauma, and then healing and redemption, and exactly what you said, Patrick. We get a front row seat to what God is doing.
And you've literally, just so that the listener knows, you literally have seen hundreds of men move in sexual health to where they are no longer under this dominant control of what has driven them before.
Yes, I have seen hundreds of men move from misery to motivation to maturity, and I've seen dozens move into mastery. So it's a huge victory to become mature. And it's less common to achieve mastery, but it's definitely possible. And I've experienced it. There's nothing I would trade it for in the whole world.
Wow. Well, Drew, I'm so proud to be a friend of yours, and for you to be a friend of mine. I'm inspired by you and love you, man. So thank you for being on as our guest today, and look forward to a lot more opportunities to hang out.
Same here. And one more thing, you talked about how we become inked, how we can kind of be marked in our identities, and I love how the Red Ink Revival is re-inking us with the blood of Jesus.
You picked up on the ink. I love it. Yeah. That's so awesome. Thank you. Thank you a lot.